Now, I was talking to you about Madison, or the link to Virginia, Madison County specifically, Culpeper, that area.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have a group of 37 manumitted slaves. He freed them, and they came here and settled in 1849. Actually, there were more than 37. There were 46. And the reason that they said 37 is because they only counted adults. Children didn't count. So actually, 37 is both accurate and inaccurate, depending on how you really want to look at it. Anyway, James Twyman has been described as an invalid. Some of the things I'm checking, his name, they called him Massey. But after he started, from what I understand, he may have had a religious experience. And he was looking at a verse in the Bible, Matthew 8:36, that which you do to the least of these, you do to me. And it started weighing on him really heavily. He lost sleep, he couldn't eat, he was sick, and it was just wearing on him that he had to do something about this, that there was no reason, absolutely no reason why one human being should own another. As a result of that, he decided to free the 37. It was an unpopular decision, as I mentioned earlier, in Virginia, and it is rumored now that James Twyman was actually buried outside of his family cemetery as a result of his decision. He wanted to make sure that the 37 made it here with no problems whatsoever. He actually redid his will 3 times, making sure that they wouldn't have any issues. Tell you a few things about James Twyman. He ended up setting up a fund for the education of poor people there in Virginia. Wanted to make sure that people were taken care of. Now, he bought land here, and the land is all in this area between here and the bridge that you crossed up there. Now, the reason I believe that, part of the Underground Railroad. Now, the land was sold by a Reverend Isaac Frampton. Once again, another reverend. I think that it was intentional. You come across the river, scared to death, you're looking for a familiar face or someone that you're sure is going to help you and not harm you. What better way than that, to have the 37 lined all up and down the river? But anyway, he gave $10,000 for them to come here and buy land. I looked at it, did some calculations and stuff like that. That's the equivalent to $300,000 today. They made a 400-mile trip starting in August, ending in October, and also the land that I was talking about also includes the current Sam's and Walmart over in this area. Now, to make sure that they were all taken care of, he actually gave 3 other men $1,000 apiece. Later, he upped it to $2,000. That's the equivalent to $60,000 apiece today. To make sure that they made it here. There were 3 invalids that chose to remain, and he provided for their care. Said if the plantation was ever sold, that they couldn't sell the land that they were actually living on. 3 of them actually returned. Now, they couldn't just simply be set free in Virginia. They had to come to free land. So they made the 400-mile trip here, and then set foot in Burlington, and then made a 400-mile trip back so that they could go back home. It was a grandmother by the name of Jenny, her daughter Amanda, and a granddaughter named Frances Ann. Nancy, who was one of the 37, was pregnant at the time. On the journey, there was a baby born. His name was William Smith, middle name Traveler. Incidentally, William Traveler Smith. Incidentally, William Traveler Smith later in life ended up going and became president of Bluefield College. Now, Susan Gordon also came here. She was the last remaining of the 37. She took the last name Twyman, which was the name of James Twyman. Some of the things I found out about her is that she sang like a bird, and her favorite hymn was Amazing Grace. Now that may not mean a whole lot to you, but I'll come to that. It'll mean, remember that. Another gentleman that came was Thomas Walker Fry. He was the foreman of the 37. He was a preacher, a doctor, a broom maker, and was also a likely conductor on the Underground Railroad. He moved to Proctorville, which was Quaker's Bottom, and started a new church up there called Mount Pisgah. Now, the area of Proctorville up there, was the land of a guy by the name of Jim Ditcher, who I mentioned to you there earlier. The descendants of the 37, just to think that, wonder what happened to them. They went on to become musicians and seamstresses, and incidentally, Dr. Carter Woodson, the founder of Black History, is a descendant of the 37. Now in 1851, I was just talking about what happened in 1849 around here. There was another family that came here in 1851. They were the Polley family. They were originally from Pike County, Kentucky, and they were sold to a Douglas Polley, and he was a free man of color. He bought him for the explicit purpose of freeing them. Well, the guy that sold him evidently was in debt. He turned around and the banks were foreclosing on him, and they filed suit saying that he sold them in an attempt to defraud them. So they filed suit and wanted their property back. So let me see where I'm at here for a second. I apologize. When he found out about that, Douglas ended up paying off that debt, wanting to make sure that it was his family. So he was wanting to make sure that they were free. And in that, the wages that it would have taken him to earn that type of money, the $1,500 that he paid for him, would be the equivalent of $308,000 today. So he paid off all the claims against them, and they were permitted to come to Ohio. Well, they got to Ohio and were snatched off the train. There were 7, if I remember correctly. I don't have it in my notes here, but if I remember correctly, there were 7. They snatched them all off the train except for the oldest woman, who they left there because she was too old to be worth any kind of value. So they left her on there. They grabbed the 7, or the remaining, and they took them back across the river into Kentucky, back into slavery. It then went on. It went to the Supreme Court. The governors got involved. They got 4 of them back, and they came here and settled. 3 of the youngest ones had already been sold into slavery, and during the time that it took, the 10 years that it took to get them back, 3 of them died. And I'll read a little thing here on it. On Tuesday of last week, Deputy U.S. Marshal Rodamore of Ironton arrested a young man and woman, brother and sister, fugitive slaves from Floyd County, Kentucky. The fugitives were under the guidance of Jim Ditcher, a free mulatto who has lived about Ironton for several years. And as they were about to board the cars at Washington Switch on the Scioto and Hocking Valley Railroad, Rodamore was on board with the owner of the fugitives. He laid hands on them and took them back to Kentucky. Jim Ditcher made good his escape at 2:40 time and has not been heard of hereabouts. The mother of the fugitives left with them and remains in this county, the owner not choosing to take her back on account of her advanced years. The reclaimed fugitives are cousins of the famous Polley Negroes, whose right to freedom has been in litigation now for some 10 years between Ohio and Virginia. Now up there near the Macedonia Church, which I have wearing a picture of here, the Polleys are buried about a mile away. Some of the, to tell you a little bit about the Polleys, and I'm just about to finish up here, the descendants of the Polleys now include doctors, a chef, who my girlfriend happens to work at the same place that he was, and a college professor, and a writer for the Los Angeles Lakers.
All right.
Now, the story I was telling you about with Amazing Grace, I told you to remember that. And I'm looking for Angela. Amazing Grace, to tell you the story of Amazing Grace, Amazing Grace is a Negro spiritual. Now, most Negro spirituals can be played on 5 keys on the piano, only on the black keys. You don't actually have to use any of the white keys on the piano to play it. It's called the pentatonic scale, okay? Also called the slave scale. Now, John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, was a former captain on a slave ship. And as he was coming across the ocean and had the people in the hull below, they were chanting what was known as a West African sorrow chant. So he wrote these words, and he talked about himself being a wretch. And what stopped him from actually becoming a captain of a slave ship was his salvation. The melody to Amazing Grace is that West African sorrow chant. So when you think of Amazing Grace, you have the tune of a West African sorrow chant and the words of a former slave catcher who is calling himself a wretch. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I believe that word wretch is probably the strongest word that he could think of to describe himself. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And I'll turn it over to Angela here to give you an idea of what it would have sounded like.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Everybody sing that with me.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amen. Amen.